Hey everyone, Alex from Cytonox here, and today I'll be ranking the missions of Halo Infinite from worst to best. I often use the introduction portion of our videos to ramble about how I loved a particular game in my childhood days, but truth be told, I'd never actually seen gameplay of Halo in my life until now, let alone played it. This here is my cold, unlubed introduction to the series, which I decided I would undertake after a good friend of mine suggested I dip my toes into the pool given my love for similar game series. As my playthrough progressed, what initially began as a shameless grift to capitalize on a new release transformed into a genuine appreciation and interest in the game, to the point that I plan to retroactively play the other games sometime. All my gameplay here is on heroic difficulty because I was informed that Halo was like Doom, where playing below the hard difficulty is regarded as bitch by most players. I actually found the missions hard to rank because they aren't often very visually distinct from one another, but I still feel that my ranking is accurate to my own opinions and that each pick is defensible. Let's get into it. So, awkward situation here. My original recording for this level got messed up, and this is the first Halo game in history without a level replay system in place at launch. Just my luck. I considered putting another level at the bottom just so I wouldn't have to start off the video like this because it's a little embarrassing, but that would defeat the whole point of the ranking. Because being honest, this is without a doubt my least favorite mission. As for why, that honor goes to the Spartan killers, Hyperius and Tovaris. I tragically have no footage of them, but this succession of achievements should give you a rough idea of how it all went down. Hyperius must have hit and run me 100 times with his chopper before I realized you could grapple vehicles to hijack them, which isn't really the game's fault, but I still had a miserable time. I literally spent over an hour on this rotten garbage-ass fight, which soured the entire level for me. The only plus was eventually getting to teabag these buffoons and really taking my time dragging my big green armored nuts all over their ugly mugs. The first part of the level is just going to some anti-aircraft guns and taking them down, which isn't awful, but I found a lot of the arenas to be really frustrating compared to the arenas I'd encountered in other levels. I'm curious if anyone else shares my opinion on Pelican Down. Let me know what the consensus is on this mission in the comments. Things are usually more fun to do in video games than real life, but I find that walking in hallways is a smidge more enjoyable with my own two legs. I'm not quite sure what the idea was behind this level, because I can't imagine playtesters having a great time walking through endless identical blue straightaways with a few weak enemies to pad it out. Sure, the level has normal fights after the initial boring stretch, but it's not anything special either. Also, I noticed while looking over my footage that there's just as much time spent in cutscenes as there is actual gameplay. As someone who only knows the general plotline of the first 3 Halo games, I have no idea what happened with Cortana in 4 and 5, so these cutscenes mean absolutely nothing to me personally. I never understood what the Whispers are either. Is Cortana a ghost or something? Overall, the repository is just a boring story-focused level that falls flat to ignorant newcomers like myself, but I can't imagine veterans finding it too fun either. There really isn't much to comment on here. This is the shortest mission in the game by a wide margin. It's not at all unpleasant, but it's just a tutorial to open world activities, so there's not much going on. Even as a novice, I made quick work of the outpost. If I went back to it now, I could clear it in under 5 minutes with no trouble at all. You fight a hunter, you fight a monitor AI, and you're done. I unfortunately never got the memo until later in my playthrough that you're supposed to kill hunters by getting behind them, so I had a pretty stupid looking fight with them here. Annoying as they are, every game needs to have at least one enemy that makes you piss yourself when you see one wander into view, and for what it's worth, the hunters are definitely intimidating foes. The same can't be said of the boss, Adjutant Resolution, who is comically easy. He reminds me a lot of Wheatley from Portal 2, who I love to death though, so I'm willing to cut him some slack. Like the repository, this is a long blue hallway level, but there's a bit more of a focus on fighting and a boss at the end, so it wins out by a fair margin. You also meet the weapon here, which is the most memorable part of the mission. Tremonius had balls speaking on Atriox like he did in that cutscene where he's talking to Escharum earlier, because he's a joke to beat. Even I was able to foderize him, although it helped that he just decided to kill himself with poor jetpack safety while I was reloading. I came in with kitty gloves too. If I had a skewer on me, I'd have had him gargling my gonads in 30 seconds flat. Foundation isn't that unique from a gameplay or visual point of view, but the presence of a boss and a new character at least put it on the radar. This was a really hard to place mission because the level itself was pretty good, but man is the boss obnoxious. The introductory room is awesome. I had a lot of fun piecing together a good route to fight through it, ultimately choosing to take over the stationary cannons and later using Escherum's weapon on the elites. This sort of structure is there for most of the level, where you charge forward to stop the Harbinger and fight through all sorts of enemy configurations. One funny side note is that I encountered a glitch that turned everything blue, like, completely. Definitely wins the bluest hallway award. The fun ends when you finally arrive at the inner sanctum where the Harbinger, rants at you for a bit before teleporting around like a spaz. Oddly enough, I found the best way to deal damage to her was by pimp slapping her with the butt of my gun, which is equal parts hilarious and anticlimactic. The fight is one of those generic, kill a ton of goons, then whack the boss affairs that have never been my cup of tea, but nothing awful shows up until the final wave of enemies. It was a big enough pain in my ass on Heroic, but my friend who played on Legendary said Hunters come at you, which is just too much given the weak arsenal they have in the room. If they left a skewer or two lying around, then sure, but with the best you get being a shock rifle and a mangler, you're already hard-pressed to beat the Chieftain Brute. I found him to be particularly frustrating given his tendency to one-shot you, although eventually I picked up that you're better off staying close and circling him rather than running away, which helped. Overall, I was indifferent to the plot here since the Harbinger was far less compelling of a villain than Escherum was, and given I'd just fought him, it was a tough act to follow. While boasting some of the best normal combat the game has to offer, the Silent Auditorium fumbles a higher spot by subjecting you to a torturous summoner boss that is sure to irritate all kinds of players. I originally had this a lot lower on my list because I found the bulk of the missions sort of annoying, but looking back I just sucked at the game and could have had plenty of fun going into it now. Until around mission 9 or so, I'd say I wasn't quite playing with a full deck of cards, and you can really tell here. I even managed to get sent under the map by this brute pod, which I always assumed would just kill you if this happened. I spent a sizable amount of time getting my noggin blown open by jackal snipers among other threats, but the real highlight as always is the boss battle at the end, where Big Fat Bassus decides to break out the gravity hammer. He's a fair difficulty for this point in the game and fun to fight, so I think he makes for a solid finale to the whole deal. Out of the blue hallways and into the gray hallways. This level is remarkably similar to the other ones I've jokingly lambasted for their similar looks, but it has an advantage in that the story here really picks up. This is the part of the game where a couple dots start to connect and some bigger questions are raised, like what the true purpose of the weapon is, for example. In addition to that, I thought all the fighting was pretty fun, with plenty of coils to chuck and cover to take. It felt really smooth to progress through, and it was more of a knife cutting through butter feeling than I was used to, which was a nice reward after spending so much time getting brutalized in the big arenas. Not much of note elsewhere, but I still think it's a good time. I'm ashamed of how long it took me to find that initial power seed. When I found it dead ahead of the Crucible, I felt like a total moron. It reached the point where even the weapon was giving me lip about how much of a clod I am. That unfortunate beginning aside, the rest of this level is enjoyable, with lots of sentinels who I find to be pretty fun enemies myself. One big highlight for me was the ending where you need to fight off a bunch of ships to deactivate the spires, since few things are as satisfying as sinking rockets and skewers into one and watching it blow up. The true main attraction is just before the homestretch, however, when you have a rematch with Adjutant Resolution, wherein he can now summon allies and do much more damage with his beam attack. I still found it to be a cakewalk, but it was a fun boss all the same. The Command Spire also ends on a cliffhanger, with the Blade Master abducting Echo 216 and kicking off the last act of the story. The Command Spire has enough going on to differentiate it that it manages to somewhat defy unmemorability despite its generic looks. I'm a firm believer that a good set piece can save a mission from disaster, which is certainly the case here. While the gameplay for the bulk of Warship Gabrakhan is introductory corridor shooter fare with little in the way of challenge to offer, it at least picks up when the escape sequence begins. Getting to jump between falling objects while everything explodes is neat, and I think makes this level stand out more than most, despite being roughly 75% combat with various combinations of first level fodder. It does introduce features like the grappling hook well, which is, as grappling hooks often are, an extremely fun mechanic that made this game heaps of fun. This isn't the best first level of all time or anything, but it still holds up well compared to the other missions. The Conservatory is the crown king of underground hallway levels. For whatever reason, I just found this one to be really fun. Progression was smooth and it looks slightly more distinct than the others due to the presence of mining stuff and windows. The bit at the end where you need to fight off hordes of skimmers was cool, especially if you bring a mangler, which I find makes them even more satisfying to shoot down. I never found these enemies to be particularly annoying, although I've seen a lot of complaints over them online saying they one-shot you. Maybe on Legendary, but at least on Heroic they're fine. I also should add that the soundtrack is pretty good in this mission. The Conservatory is the head of the middle of the pack quality-wise, and I think about as fun as these run-and-gun levels get. This mission is number 4 in part because I enjoyed the boss, Chak Lok, but also because I just tend to like towers. They're like cool things to invade, you know? First things first, you've got to break into the place and clear out a base right outside the front door. This is made a lot easier with the help of rescued Marines, but I didn't think to bring any, so I was just working with the dudes I found tied up throughout the place. The outside area is actually the bulk of the mission, which isn't terribly lengthy. Once I got inside, I was mostly having fun abusing the exploding barrels of stuff and blowing up everyone in my path, although that changes when you finally get to Chak Lok. He's a master of torture, but was gracious enough to give me a painless hanging this first time I fought him. You're supposed to use the threat sensor here, but at this point in my playthrough I didn't know how to use it, so I made it work the hard way. Recovery and the Tower is a fun breaking and entering type mission that serves well as the finale to the early game. The road is just balls to the wall insane. This is the part of the game where I was most aware of the scale of the war going on. You've got to fight through endless hordes of ultra-fortified defenses, but to make it more fair, there are a ton of Marines you can find to help you, making it a relatively even battle. There are tons of vehicles to commandeer here, which is always fun, especially the Wraith if you can get a hold of one. Blows up everything with one shot, totally awesome. Even the pair of hunters that come out near the end can't do much against this thing. This is, in my opinion, the overall hardest level in the game because there are just so many moving parts and ways to go about it that it can be rather daunting. There's a lot of strategy to it, even more so than usual, so that makes it all the more satisfying when you finally break through one checkpoint and head on to the next. My only gripe is that the checkpoints are weird and sporadic, but that's more of an issue with the overall game than this particular level. This is the level where the game finally truly clicked for me. Once I got that second upgrade for the grappling hook, I was having the time of my life flying around everywhere and doing whatever I wanted. The open world in this game is a blast to traverse, and having at least one mission based around exploring it was a great idea that I'm glad 343 capitalized on. Well, I guess Pelican Down also did that, but the sequence doesn't have an atrocious boss fight at the end, and the fights here are far higher quality when it comes to design. This is by far the mission where the grappling hook is at its best, simply by virtue of how free you are and the amount of options you have when you're not inside some facility. I don't have much else to say, I just had a lot of fun with this mission. I'd be terribly surprised if this doesn't wind up as the fan favorite level after the dust settles. It has bar none the best combat of the game, with the 2 best boss fights and the most fun arenas packed into one single level. As a Doom fan, I was right at home in those training halls fighting off hordes of Covenant trainees, which capped off with an amazingly tense encounter with 2 hunters and heaps of smaller goons to boot. I was at the edge of my seat grinding my teeth with a heart rate of 200 for at least 70% of this mission, which I mean in the best possible sense. The bosses are awesome. The Blade Master is up first, and being an elite like Chak Lok, he's similar, but has a far more interesting arena and much more health. I also knew how to use the threat sensor this time around, so I had a bit more fun with that tool at my disposal. Last but not least, Escharum, the, in my opinion, incontestable best boss in the game. He's by far the antagonist I was most invested in and most excited to fight, and he delivered for sure. He's very manageable if you fight smart, but still powerful enough to build tension knowing he could be lurking behind a corner. He's got a lot of health, which is exacerbated by the relay mechanic, which I actually thought was really neat and a creative way to raise the stakes. I felt pretty bad about it because I didn't realize what was going on for a while and kept spamming Escharum with the Blade Master's special energy sword, which must have been driving poor Echo 216 insane with that whole pain transference thing. Out of respect, I gave Escharum a true warrior's death by punching him in the face, then firing some rounds of solidarity into his ceiling. Some guys you just can't teabag. All in all, the House of Reckoning is both the climax of the story as far as I was concerned, and the peak of the game's level design, making it a shoo-in for number 1. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. This is a special off-schedule upload that I put out early to beat everyone else to the punch, but fear not, we'll still upload this Wednesday too, like always. We've taken more weeks off than we'd have liked due to real-life circumstances, but we're back in the clear for now, so it's business as usual again. I'll be covering No More Heroes 2 next upload, so stay tuned if that's up your alley. That's all for now. Deuces.